Throughout post-biblical history, we have been shown the story of the Exodus as more of a story than really a true factual part of history. I'm here to disprove that theory many scholars have, as they have attempted to disprove the Bible.
First, let's answer, why is Egypt important? Humans were divinely created about 6,000 years ago. There was around a worldwide earth-destroying flood about 4,300 years ago, with only Noah and his family surviving. According to the book of Genesis, one of Noah's grandsons is the founder of Egypt. Thus, Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations according to the biblical record, so Egyptian history is very important.
In Genesis 10, we know the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. In Genesis 10, verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. In Psalms 105, verse 23 to 27, Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob dwelt in the land of Ham.
They performed his signs among them, and wonders in the land of Ham. Psalm 106, verse 21 through 22, they forgot God their Savior, who had done great things in Egypt. Wondrous works in the land of Ham, awesome things by the Red Sea. How is this important? Well, if we really dig into this, we find that Misr, the Arabic and modern official name of Egypt, Egyptian Arabic, Masr, is of Semitic origin directly cognate with each other Semitic words for Egypt, such as the Hebrew Mizraim, literally meaning the toe straits, a reference to the separation of Upper and Lower Egypt. Egypt's official name is Gumiyat Masr al-Arabiya, Arab Republic of Egypt. What this tells us in many records is that Egypt does have Jewish origin with it, showing that there was an interaction between the Jews and Egypt. But wait, there's more. This will be long, but I promise it will help with aligning everything. You have to trust me here. And I will ask real quick to please like and subscribe to the video. I'm working really hard, school sucks, it's just been very exhausting, and the live stream will be soon. Also want to point out that I don't know some of these words, so if I butcher it, I apologize. Without further ado, let's go right into it.
Joseph is born into slavery. He is 17 years old. Joseph, in Pharaoh's court, he is 30 years old. Moses, born many years after Joseph's death. Moses flees after killing the Egyptian taskmaster, around 40 years old. Moses, at the burning bush, returns to Egypt. 10 plagues, Passover established, the Exodus. Moses is around 80 years old at this time. Notice it? We have listed date marks from the timeline of late Genesis to Exodus. If we can date the Exodus, we can date many events, including Joseph's timeline and the timeline of Moses in Egypt, which we can use to date the covenant God made with Abraham, and then use the date Joseph's birth and his service to the Pharaoh. If we can date the Exodus, then we can determine the Pharaoh that had the stream interpreted by Joseph. The pharaohs of the oppression when the children of Israel were in slavery, and the Pharaoh of the Exodus that Moses faced. We can also use this to determine who was the daughter of the Pharaoh, the one who drew Moses into the water. So what year did the Exodus occur? In 1 Kings 6:1, and it came to pass in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. End quote. The 4th year of Solomon's reign, according to many historical sources, was 965 BC. So out of all that, we can conclude that the Exodus occurred in 1445 BC.
Now, let's just establish it. Moses is 80 years old in 1445 BC. Moses is 40 years old in 1485 BC when he kills the taskmaster and flees to Midian. Moses is born in 1525 BC when he is adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. God makes a covenant with Abraham 430 years before the Exodus in 1875 BC. The 400 descendant count begins in the weaning of Isaac at about 3 years old in 1845 BC. Abraham was 103 years old. Therefore, Joseph was born when Jacob was 91 years old, 1788 BC through 91 BC. He serves Pharaoh's court 30 years later in 1667 BC. Joseph is born 1697. He is sold into slavery at 17 years old, 1680. He is 30. When he stands before Pharaoh, 1667. He is 39 when he reveals himself to his brothers, 1658. And Joseph dies at 110 at 1587. Now, if you are wondering why he lived so long, in the Bible, they usually lived much longer, so it is very, to how it usually is in the Bible, it's very coherent, and all of it adds together. And next we would have the years of oppression. So we have Moses, born 62 years after Joseph's death, 1525 BC. I know this is complicated, I know. Moses at 40 flees to Midian. Moses at 80 stands before Pharaoh. The Exodus is now around 1445 BC. Okay, let's refresh all that information. Essentially, there are dates and timelines. Based off these dates, we can find there is time when we can conclude when the Exodus occurred, meaning we can debunk people who say the Bible is wrong because of one major error the experts have made. Their date is wrong.
The traditional Egyptian chronology places the Exodus, which we established was 1445 BC, in the 19th dynasty, which is dated about 1295 to 2280 BC, which, guess what, has nothing on the Exodus, making many scholars saying they debunked the Bible. A new revised Egyptian chronology, which dates to the late 12th and 13th century to the time of Joseph, Moses, and the Exodus years. During the 13th dynasty, there's much support and evidence for the biblical record. Now, I know what you're thinking, but how come they say the 19th dynasty and not the 13th? Well, do you remember Ramses, from the Bible? What if I told you there's no biblical evidence for the claim that the Pharaoh was actually Ramses? How? Ramses II was the Pharaoh of the oppression from an incorrect reading of Exodus 1, verse 7 through 11.
The city Ramses was equated with Ramses II. In a chronistic term, Genesis 47 verse 11, Ramses was Goshen. As a result, the events of the Exodus, which 1445 BC, were placed in 1279 BC. Evidence of the events in the Exodus was being looked in the wrong time. This is wrong.
The second problem with the Egyptian chronology, the 430 years mentioned in the Bible were not properly understood. The 430 years began with covenant. The 400 years with the weaning of Isaac, and both periods ended with the Exodus. When comparing the timeline of Joseph and Moses, is it evident that the children of Israel were only slaves for 210 years. Because of a misunderstanding of how long the children of Israel were in bondage, 200 years plus have been added to the Egyptian chronology. This is wrong. Now, if you are still skeptical, I have a good source from Mr. David Roll, one of the many new Egyptian archaeologists that challenge the orthodox chronology of Egyptian history. He says that Egyptian archaeologists have been looking in the right place but at the wrong time. His new chronology supports the biblical narrative. Here are some of his conclusions. Joseph before Pharaoh, 1667 BC, Amenhotep III, 1682 to 1635 BC. The Pharaoh of the oppression was Neferhotep, first from 1540 to 1530. The Pharaoh of the Moses youth, 1525 to 1510 BC. Kaneferi Selbekatep, 1529 to 1510 BC. And then the Pharaoh of the Exodus, 1445 BC. Dudiminos, or Teleamoas, was 1457 to 1444 BC. Dr. Roll mentions the excavations carried out by Dr. Manfred Biatek. He excavated an area called Tel Ad Daba, a small village city near Pi Amis, which is referenced in the Bible, Exodus 1, verse 11. He found some extraordinary burial pits in the excavations, which is Dr. Roll has mentioned in his book. All over the area of Tel Ad Daba were found shallow burial pits. The bodies were hazardly piled one on top of another. No grave goods were placed in the pits. Dr. Bayatek is convinced that these pits offer direct evidence of plague or some other certain catastrophe. The dating of these plagues pits at the end of the 13th dynasty, about 1445 to 1447 BC. There was a Brooklyn scroll found in this area. The front contains a royal decree by Sobekatep III, Pharaoh of the Oppression, involving the transfer of some 95 slaves. Interesting points to consider were also that 1. More than 50% have Semitic or Hebrew names, 2. Several of the slaves were biblical names, and 3. About 2/3 of the slaves named are females. We also find many names from the Bible mentioned, with names like Shipharah, Asher, and Menahem mentioned. Not only that, but a variation for a new Egyptian chronology shows us this. Clay tablets from El Amarna were discovered EA 151. It's a tablet that was written to Pharaoh Akhenaten. Quote, "To the king, my son, my God, my gods. Message of Abimelech, your servant. Fire destroyed the palace at Ugarit. Rather, it was destroyed half of it, and so half of it has disappeared." End quote. This letter was written immediately after the death of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the 11th year of his son Akhenaten's reign. In a small room in the palace of King Nikamadu II at Ugarit, another clay tablet, K2U 1.78, was found blackened by the fire, mentioned in EA 151. The second tablet describes a solar eclipse. Quote, "The day of the new moon of Hiriol was put to shame as the sun goddess Set, with Rashtep as her gatekeeper." End quote. Now, there is also other context, but to break it down, there is evidence that the solar eclipse was aligned right after around the perfect time year of the Exodus. There is also evidence for bumper harvests followed by famine at the time of Joseph. For 60 years, starting with King Atmanan III, the Egyptians record the level of the Nile flooding near the second cataract rapids by carving inscriptions in the face of the cliffs at the fort of Semna. The amount of water would indicate what harvest and hence what taxing rate should be used. For several years, there was slightly higher than normal flooding, which would cause a higher yield than normal. But there was also a very dramatic rise in the flood levels of the Nile. In Atmanan's 21 year, 1662 BC, the flood levels rose 27 feet above the normal flood level. Because of wet fields, the crops could not be planted. Structures would be washed away, and this higher level water would have led to famine. This continued for 7 years until eventually normal levels had returned. Joseph is also sold for 20 shekels of silver. 1680 BC, in prior centuries the price would be less, averaging around 10 to 20 shekels, and later 30 or more shekels. This is further confirmation of this in 1030 BC in a letter from Amenhotep III. He orders 40 girls from Miliku, the Canaanite prince of Gezer, at 32 shekels of silver each. Finally, the infant burial boxes. There has been evidence of infant burial boxes found underneath the Egyptian buildings, with evidence in this quote from Sir Finders Petrie, 10 years in digging in Egypt. Quote, "Beneath the brick floors of the room was, however, the best place to search, not only for hidden things such as the statue of a dancer and a pair of ivory castanets, but also for numerous burials of babies in wooden boxes. These boxes had been for clothes and household use, but were used to bury infants, often accompanied by necklaces and other things. On the necklaces were sometimes cylinders with the king's names, and thus we know for certain that these burials and the inhabitants of the town are the 12th dynasty from Sesostris onward." End quote. To conclude, much of the friction between the Bible and Egyptology is traditional archaeologists are trying to fit the biblical evidence in the wrong time. With the correct Egyptian chronology, the Bible and Egyptian history agree.
Joseph, Moses, and the events of the Exodus are in agreement on all major points. And this agreement will grow as more excavations are done and more details of the new Egyptian chronology is discovered. Two pivotal points must be firmly set. the correct date of the Exodus, circa 1445 BC, and the correct Egyptian chronology. This is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and yep, Bennett out.